It was a crisp Saturday morning at Riverside Country Club, and for me, Sophia Morgan, it meant one thing: another chapter in my dad's weekly saga of what he called golf, but what I secretly labeled his humiliation session on the fairways. For the past 8 months, I'd become an expert at dodging his invitations to join him. I'd crafted excuses ranging from the plausible to the downright creative, all to avoid the inevitable awkwardness of these outings. But today was different. Over breakfast, my dad's voice had carried an almost desperate plea, his eyes wide with hope as he urged me to join him and his prestigious golf foursome. "Just 9 holes, sweetheart," he'd said, his tone soft but insistent. "It'll be good for you to network with some influential people." Networking. That was his code word for parading me in front of his successful friends, hoping their wisdom might somehow fix what he perceived as my stalled career. So here I was, standing on the first tee at 8:15 a.m., dressed in checkered khakis and a polo shirt that screamed country club conformist. I looked like every other young person trying to blend into this world of manicured lawns and old money, hoping to avoid drawing attention to myself while bracing for the inevitable as I adjusted my visor and tried to look like I belonged. My dad was already setting up a shot, his focus intense despite his questionable golf swing. His golf partners approached, and he greeted them with a booming "gentleman." His enthusiasm was almost palpable, as if this moment could somehow rewrite my narrative in their eyes. "You remember my daughter, Sophia," he said, gesturing toward me with a proud smile. First came Mr. Davidson, silver-haired and exuding the effortless confidence of someone who'd built an empire at Davidson Industries. He offered me a polite nod and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course," he said smoothly. "How's the job search treating you, dear?" There it was, the question that had been haunting my dad's Saturday mornings for months, the one he dreaded answering on my behalf. Before I could respond, my dad jumped in, his voice quick and defensive. "She's taking her time, being selective about her next move." Selective. That was his diplomatic way of explaining my apparent unemployment to men who measured success by corner offices and stock portfolios. Mr. Chin, who owned half the downtown real estate and probably a few politicians to boot, nodded sympathetically while adjusting his golf glove. "Smart approach," he said. "The market's tough for recent graduates right now. No shame in living at home until something opens up." Recent graduates. I was 31 years old, with a PhD from MIT, but to these men, I was still the college kid they vaguely recalled from Christmas parties 5 years ago. I opened my mouth to clarify, but my dad's gentle hand on my shoulder stopped me. "Sophia's been doing some consulting work," he said, his voice steady but strained. "Keeping her options open." Consulting work? I nearly choked on the irony. That was one way to describe running Quantum Dynamics Corporation, my company that had just revolutionized power grid storage and signed a multi-billion-dollar federal contract. As we moved toward the second hole, the conversation shifted from pleasantries to what felt like a full-blown career intervention. Dr. Williams, a heart surgeon who'd operated on 2 senators and probably had a wing of a hospital named after him, paused his practice swing to join in. "Sophia," he said, his tone kind but patronizing, "if you're interested in healthcare administration, I have connections at Presbyterian Hospital. Good benefits, plenty of room for advancement." I smiled politely, choosing my words carefully. "That's generous, Dr. Williams, but I'm actually focused on the energy sector." The word energy seemed to spark something in Mr. Davidson. His eyebrows shot up, and he leaned in, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Energy? That's a tough field to break into without connections. It's very technical, with lots of established players. Maybe consider something more entry-level first." Entry-level. The phrase hung in the air like a bad golf shot. I held 17 patents in renewable energy integration and had just secured the largest federal energy contract in history, but to Mr. Davidson, I was a starry-eyed dreamer who needed to start at the bottom. My dad, ever the peacemaker, chimed in. "She's always been interested in science," he said, his voice tinged with a familiar note of resigned disappointment. "We're just hoping she finds something stable while she figures out her long-term goals." Long-term goals. as if building a company that was reshaping global energy infrastructure was just a phase I'd eventually outgrow. Mr. Chin, lining up his shot, added his 2 cents. "The key is managing expectations," he said sagely. "Young people today get these grandiose ideas about changing the world, but you need to be realistic." Grandiose ideas. My grandiose idea had a market valuation of $4.2 billion, but I bit my tongue, letting the irony simmer. By the third hole, the unsolicited advice was coming faster than the golf balls sailing into the rough. Dr. Williams, ever the practical one, chimed in again. "Find something steady, Sophia," he said, his voice warm but firm. "Build experience and maybe pursue your passions as a hobby later." A hobby. My hobby had just earned a personal congratulations call from the President of the United States, but I kept that to myself, nodding politely instead. My dad, sensing the conversation was veering into dangerous territory, jumped in again. "Sophia understands that," he said quickly. "She's just exploring her options." I understood, all right. I understood why my dad was struggling. For months, he'd been fielding questions from his golf partners about his apparently unemployed daughter, the MIT graduate who seemed to be wasting her potential. What he didn't know, what I hadn't told him, was that I wasn't unemployed. I was the founder and CEO of Quantum Dynamics Corporation, and just yesterday, we'd announced a $2.8 billion contract to modernize the entire U.S. power grid. But because I hadn't shared the full scope of my work, and because my lifestyle didn't scream billionaire entrepreneur, he assumed I was floundering. Mr. Davidson, ever helpful, pulled out his phone. "What might help," he said, scrolling through his contacts, "is updating your LinkedIn profile. I took a look after your father mentioned you were job hunting, and honestly, it's pretty bare. No recent employment, no professional headshot." My LinkedIn profile was deliberately minimal because every time I updated it, I was flooded with speaking requests and investment pitches. But to Mr. Davidson, it was evidence of my lack of ambition. "I appreciate the feedback," I said, forcing a smile. Dr. Williams piled on. "You might also consider relocating," he said. "Energy jobs are concentrated in Houston or Denver. You can't build a career from your laptop at home." From my laptop at home. I'd built a multi-billion-dollar company from a converted warehouse I'd purchased for $3.2 million in cash, but apparently, that didn't count as a real workplace. By the fourth hole. My dad was working overtime to deflect the conversation. "She's not living at home," he corrected quickly when Mr. Chin assumed I was still in my childhood bedroom. "She has her own place. It's just modest." Modest. That was his diplomatic way of saying he was embarrassed by my lifestyle choices, a warehouse loft that I loved for its industrial charm, a reliable Honda instead of a flashy luxury car. "Nothing wrong with modest," Dr. Williams said kindly, "but eventually, you want something that reflects your ambitions. Image matters in business. Image matters." Just last week, I'd had dinner with the Secretary of Energy to discuss grid modernization policy, but apparently, I needed to work on my professional image. Mr. Davidson, warming to his role as my impromptu career counselor, continued. "The real key is networking," he said. "You can't just submit applications online. You need face-to-face connections like today." My dad nodded eagerly. "This is exactly the kind of networking Sophia should be doing," he said, his voice brimming with hope. Mr. Chin, fresh off a decent shot, walked over and added, "You know what? I have a niece about your age who went through something similar. It took her 2 years to find her footing, but she's doing well now in marketing. Sometimes it just takes patience." Patience. I'd had plenty of patience during the 3 years I'd spent in stealth mode, building revolutionary quantum storage technology while everyone assumed I was wasting my education. As we approached the fifth hole, the career counseling session reached new heights of absurdity. Dr. Williams, ever the sage, offered more wisdom. "The important thing," he said, "is not letting pride interfere with practical opportunities. I see young people turn down good entry-level positions because they think they're overqualified." Overqualified. 3 months ago, I'd been the keynote speaker at the International Energy Summit, but maybe I was being too picky about job opportunities. My dad, Sensing my growing discomfort, tried to reassure his friends. Sophia's not like that, he said, though I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. She's always been practical. Practical, like spending $180 million of my own money on research and development before anyone else realized quantum storage was commercially viable. Very practical. Mr. Davidson wasn't done. You know what might help, he said, his enthusiasm undeterred. We could make some introductions. I know people in energy, not high level, but good entry points. Entry points. He was offering to help me get entry-level positions in an industry where I was about to become one of the most influential leaders. That's very kind, I said, because it genuinely was, even if it was completely unnecessary. My dad's excitement grew. We should set up some informational interviews, he said. It'll help Sophia understand how the industry really works. Understand how the industry works. I held more renewable energy patents than anyone under 40, but apparently, I needed informational interviews to grasp basic industry concepts. By the sixth hole, I was starting to feel genuinely sorry for my dad. He'd been making excuses for my apparent failure for months, trying to maintain his reputation among friends who all had successful children. Mr. Chin, waiting for the group ahead to clear the green, offered his final piece of advice. What you really need, he said, is a mentor, someone who's navigated the business world successfully. My dad jumped on the idea. Excellent idea, he said. Sophia would benefit tremendously from that kind of guidance. A mentor. My board of directors included the former Secretary of Energy, a Nobel Prize winner in physics, and the founder of Europe's largest renewable energy company. But perhaps they weren't the mentors Mr. Chin had in mind. Mr. Davidson, ever eager to help, chimed in. I'd be happy to help, he said. We could start with the basics: proper cover letters, interview techniques, professional presentation. Professional presentation. 2 months ago, Anderson Cooper had interviewed me for 60 minutes about the future of clean energy, but maybe I needed help with basic communication skills. Dr. Williams added, "You've been pretty quiet today, Sophia. In business, you need to advocate for yourself." Quiet. I was quiet because I was navigating a conversation where 4 successful men were giving remedial career advice to someone who'd accomplished more in their industry than they had in theirs. My dad, still trying to explain me to his friends, said, "She's always been reserved, but you're right. She needs to learn self-promotion." Self-promotion. Forbes had called me the most transformative energy entrepreneur of the decade, but apparently, I needed help getting my message out. As we approached the 7th hole, Mr. Davidson pulled out his phone again. "You know what?" he said, his voice brimming with determination. "Let me call my friend Mark Thompson right now. He runs a renewable energy consulting firm, a small operation, but perfect for someone starting out." Starting out? He was about to offer me an entry-level job at a company that likely licensed technology my patents had made possible. "That's really not necessary," I started, but he waved me off. "Nonsense," he said. "Mark's great with young people." He was actually dialing the number, his finger hovering over the call button. The gesture was so genuinely kind and so completely misguided that I felt a pang of guilt for not stopping him sooner. "Mr. Davidson, before you, I began," but he interrupted, his tone reassuring. "No need to be nervous," he said. "Mark's very approachable." Dr. Williams nodded approvingly. "This is exactly what you need, Sophia," he said. "Sometimes one person believing in you opens all the doors. One person believing in me." The president had personally called to congratulate me on our Department of Energy contract, but Mr. Davidson's faith was touching, too. He was already on the phone. "Mark, Bill Davidson here," he said. "I have a brilliant young woman who might be perfect for that junior analyst opening." Junior analyst. I was about to be recommended for a position analyzing market trends my company was creating. That's when Mr. Chin, who'd been half listening while setting up his shot, suddenly straightened and stared at me. "Wait," he said slowly, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say your last name was?" "Morgan," I replied. "Sophia Morgan." His gaze lingered, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Why do you look so familiar?" he asked. My dad, still focused on Mr. Davidson's phone call, shrugged. "She is one of those faces," he said. "People always think they recognize her." But Mr. Chin wasn't convinced. He pulled out his phone and started typing. Sophia Morgan, Energy, MIT, he muttered as he typed. I watched him Google me, knowing exactly what he was about to discover. His face went pale. Holy, he began, then stopped himself. Bill, hang up that phone. Mr. Davidson looked confused, still mid-conversation. What? He asked. Hang up the phone right now, Mr. Chin said, his voice urgent. Mr. Davidson quickly ended his call. Mark, let me call you back, he said, his brow furrowed. All three men turned to Mr. Chin, who was staring at his phone like he'd seen a ghost. Gentlemen, Mr. Chin said slowly, his voice measured, I think we may have made a significant error. What kind of error? Dr. Williams asked, leaning in. Mr. Chin turned his phone around, revealing a CNBC interview from yesterday. There I was, sitting across from the anchor, with the cheer-in reading, Sophia Morgan, CEO, Quantum Dynamics Corporation, $2.8 billion federal contract. The silence that followed was deafening. My dad's face cycled through confusion, recognition, and then something approaching shock. Mr. Chin read aloud from the article. CEO Sophia Morgan discusses revolutionary quantum storage technology and a $2.8 billion Department of Energy contract, he said, his voice trembling slightly. Mr. Davidson slowly lowered his phone. You're the quantum energy CEO from the news, he stammered. The one who solved grid storage. Dr. Williams's voice was barely audible. The youngest person ever to sign a multi-billion-dollar federal energy contract, Mr. Chin finished, his eyes wide. All four men turned to me, their expressions a mix of disbelief and awe. Yes, I said simply. That's me. My dad's golf club slipped from his hands and clattered onto the tee box, the sound echoing in the stunned silence. Mr. Davidson struggled to find words. Your father said you were looking for work, he said, his voice tinged with confusion. I didn't say that, I replied gently. Dad said that. Everyone turned to my dad, who looked like he was seeing me for the first time. Sophia, he said slowly, his voice thick with emotion, when you said you were working in energy, you meant you own an energy company? I founded it, I said. Built it from nothing over the past 3 years. Mr. Chin's eyes widened. 3 years, he repeated. The same 3 years your father's been telling us you were figuring out your direction? I nodded. I was figuring out my direction. I just happened to revolutionize clean energy storage in the process. Dr. Williams was now frantically scrolling through articles on his phone. Forbes 30 Under 30, Time's Most Influential Leaders, Nobel Committee nomination, he read, his voice rising with each revelation. The consulting work, he said, glancing at my dad, apparently meant running a Fortune 500 company. The absurdity was finally hitting them. They'd spent an hour giving career advice to someone who'd just transformed the energy industry. The entry-level positions we discussed, Mr. Chin said, shaking his head, we were trying to help you get junior roles in an industry where you're apparently one of the most important people. And the networking advice, Dr. Williams added, his tone incredulous. We told you to meet people in energy when you're probably on speed dial with every major player in the sector. Mr. Davidson finished the thought. We were telling you to be more confident in interviews, he said, his voice tinged with embarrassment. My dad was still staring at me, his expression a mix of shock and dawning pride. Sophia, he said quietly, why didn't you tell me? I sighed, the weight of the past 3 years settling between us. Because every time I tried to explain what I was building, you seemed to think I was being unrealistic, I said. Remember when I mentioned the patent applications? You worried I was spending money I couldn't afford on pipe dreams. My dad winced, the memory clearly stinging. And when I told you about the research facility, I continued, you asked if I could afford the rent. Mr. Chin interrupted, his eyes glued to his phone. Research facility, he said. You mean the 50,000 square foot complex downtown that everyone's been trying to identify the owner of? That's the one, I said. I bought it 2 years ago and converted it into a quantum research lab. You own the old semiconductor plant? Mr. Chin asked, incredulous. Bought it for $18 million cash, I confirmed. The three men exchanged glances, their expressions speaking volumes. My dad's voice was barely above a whisper. Sophia, he said, what is your company actually worth? I hesitated, knowing the answer would change everything. As of yesterday's market close, $4.2 billion, I said. Though that was before the federal contract announcement, so probably closer to $6 billion now. And your personal stake? Mr. Chin asked, his voice tight. 73%, I replied. The silence was heavy as they did the math. So you're worth, Mr. Chin began, about $4.5 billion. My dad sat down heavily on a nearby bench, his face a mixture of disbelief and realization. For $0.5 billion, he repeated, the words sounding foreign in his mouth. It fluctuates, I said, trying to lighten the moment, but yes. And the modest apartment you've been worried about? It's a converted warehouse I bought for $3.2 million. I like the industrial aesthetic. And you don't drive a luxury car because my dad trailed off. Because I think conspicuous consumption is wasteful, I said. The Honda gets me where I need to go. Dr. Williams looked up from his phone, his eyes wide. It says here you're speaking at Davos next month, he said. Next week, actually, I corrected. A panel on sustainable energy with the German Chancellor. And you've been appointed to the President's Science Council, he added. Accepted that position last month, I said. Mr. Davidson looked physically ill. Sophia, he said, his voice strained, I just tried to get you a $45,000 a year analyst job. It was thoughtful of you, I said, meaning it. I told Mark Thompson you were smart and just needed a break, he said, his face reddening. You meant well, I reassured him. Mr. Chin was shaking his head, a wry smile forming. Your father's been apologizing to us for months about your career struggles, he said, while his daughter was busy becoming one of the most successful entrepreneurs of her generation. Dr. Williams nodded. And we've been feeling sorry for him, he said, thinking he had such a brilliant child who couldn't find her way. My dad looked up at me, his expression a mix of awe and embarrassment. Sophia, he said, his voice cracking, the worry I've been carrying. I know, Dad, I said softly. I'm sorry I didn't handle this better. I just got tired of arguing about whether my goals were realistic. Realistic? Mr. Chin muttered, his tone incredulous. We were telling the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company to be more realistic about her career expectations. And to consider entry-level positions, Dr. Williams added, shaking his head, in companies that probably license her technology. Mr. Davidson finished, his voice tinged with humor. The irony is overwhelming. When Mark asks why I hung up, Mr. Davidson said weakly, what do I tell him? You could explain that you discovered the person you were trying to help actually owns patents that his company uses, I suggested, a smile tugging at my lips. Dr. Williams burst into genuine, incredulous laughter. Bill, he said, you just tried to get the founder of Quantum Dynamics an entry-level position at a firm that pays her licensing fees. It's not funny, Mr. Davidson protested, but he was smiling too. It's a little funny, Mr. Chin agreed. We spent an hour giving business advice to someone who probably knows more about building companies than all of us combined. My dad was still shaking his head, the reality sinking in. I feel like such a fool, he said quietly. Don't, I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. You feel like a father who is worried about his daughter's future. That's not foolish. That's loving. But I've been making excuses for you to my friends for months, he said, his voice heavy with regret. And now you can tell them your daughter just signed the largest clean energy contract in U.S. history, I said, offering a small smile. The mood was finally shifting from shock to something that might eventually become pride. Dr. Williams, still chuckling, said, the confidence advice we gave you about speaking up for yourself was actually good advice. Presentation skills always need work. But you've already presented to everyone who matters, Mr. Chin added. I have now, I said, but I remember starting out and not knowing anyone. Your advice would have been valuable then. Mr. Davidson, finally putting his phone away, said, Sophia, when we were telling you about being confident in interviews, I was taking mental notes. Even successful people can improve their communication skills. I was learning from you, I said honestly. Success in one area doesn't mean I can't learn from people successful in other areas. Mr. Chin nodded thoughtfully. That's probably why you've achieved so much, he said. You're still willing to listen, even when the advice comes from people who don't realize you're already far beyond where they're trying to help you reach. We'd somehow turned a golf outing into the most surreal career counseling session in country club history, Dr. Williams said, his voice light with amusement. So, what happens now? My dad asked, still processing everything. Do we finish the round? I looked at these 4 men who'd spent their morning trying to help someone they thought was struggling, only to discover their advice recipient was more successful than they'd ever imagined. I'd love to finish, I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face. Though maybe we could talk about something other than my employment prospects. Deal, my dad said immediately, a spark of pride in his eyes. Though I reserve the right to ask about quantum energy storage, since apparently my daughter is reshaping the future of electricity, and I've been too worried about her rent to notice. That's fair, I said, laughing. As we walked toward the 6th tee, Mr. Davidson fell into step beside me. Sophia, he said quietly, I hope you know everything this morning came from genuine care. I absolutely know that, I said, and I'm grateful for it. Even though our advice was completely off base, he asked, a wry smile on his face. Your advice wasn't off base, I said. It was misdirected. But the impulse to help someone succeed? That's never wrong. He smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. Your father raised a very gracious daughter, he said. He raised someone who understands that successful people lift others up, I replied, even when they don't realize how high that person has already climbed. And with that, we finished our round. Not as a worried father and a struggling daughter, but as a family learning to see each other clearly for the first time, surrounded by friends who'd just been reminded that success often hides in the most unexpected places. Please feel free to comment below if you liked this. Remember to like and subscribers for more.